Welcome to Byte Size, a series where we talk to traffic and mobility experts, discuss innovation, and highlight business leaders within transport and city planning. Hello, my name is Emily Bobbis, and welcome back to another episode of the Byte Size podcast. Now, today's episode lines up quite nicely with events actually happening in New South Wales this week. So, New South Wales, it's Women's Week from the 8th to the 14th of March, and it coincides with International Women's Day and the New South Wales Women of the Year Awards. So, the whole purpose about New South Wales Women's Week is it's a chance for people across the state to come together to support one another, share information, and of course, celebrate women's achievements and contributions. So, this is for all walks of life, but of course, I will be focusing on transport, which makes today's guest really, really important. So I'm going to be talking to Lauren Bourke. So Lauren is the National Transport Manager at Randstad, where she is responsible for matching talent to employment opportunities within the transport industry. Lauren is passionate about shining a light on the industry and the skilled people that work within it. She holds a Bachelor of Business from the Queensland University of Technology, and she is also part of Randstad's latest report, Women in Transport, which is what we'll be talking about today. Whilst the transport industry has long been dominated by men, tapping into women as a new talent pool could help to remedy shortages such as truck drivers, but also lead to improved business outcomes such as increased safety, productivity, and of course, workplace culture. Randstad's latest report, which was released in December last year, Women in Transport, takes a deep dive into some of the challenges faced by women in the industry, looking at case studies of what some have done to succeed. The report, which I'll make sure I link in the description of this podcast, includes detailed insights on what drivers are key to attracting the best female talent and how a gender-balanced workplace can lead to improved business outcomes. So, Lauren, thank you so much for talking to me today.
Hi, Emily. Thanks for having me.
It's going to be New South Wales Women's Week coming up this week in March. So, of course, today's conversation is all about kind of gender diversity, gender representation and industry misconceptions in transport. But before we get into that, I really like to know how everyone starts their own personal journey into transport or how you got involved. So how did you get into your current role or that interest in transport initially?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually was studying at the time and I was doing a degree in HR and psychology. And the reason I actually got into recruitment was more to create a pathway into HR. And the role that was actually available for me at the time was within the transport and logistics industry. And I actually really had no idea about, I guess, the technicality involved and no idea about the industry at all. But once I'd actually started working within it, I got to meet some incredible people. It was a huge learning journey for me as well. The company that I'd worked for previously hadn't really done too much in that space, so I was kind of learning on the go. And I think I fell in love, with the technicality of the industry and how much opportunity there was within it as well. So that's how I ended up in transport. And then when I started with my current organisation, Randstad, I had an opportunity to run the transport division in Queensland first. And that went really well for us. And that's how I ended up down here looking after it nationally now.
Yeah, sure. It's actually interesting because I also did my undergrad in psychology and considered using it as a pathway to get to HR. So I resonate with that a little bit.
It's so funny that I ended up getting into recruitment and specifically within transport and logistics and just totally fell in love with it. I've got no intentions of moving into a HR role now.
So what are some of the positives that women can bring to a traditionally male-dominated industry such as transport, and maybe the longer-term benefits? So there's, in the Randstad report, there's this idea of women filling in staffing gaps or employment gaps, but I'm sure there are other things.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think, I guess the initial gap is, yes, we're facing a driver shortage. And what we found in the report was women only actually make up around 16.9% of representation within the transport industry. And that's across all roles as well. So that's inclusive of like administration, HR, accounting, and drivers. So overall, we're forecasting for, an 80% growth within the transport industry. So I think where the conversation first started was going, okay, women could actually fill that gap. And then the further that we got through the report and the more research and the more employers and employees that we talked to within the industry, we identified that there was this huge benefit that women could offer, particularly around, profitability, decreased accidents, and incidents as well. We found that there was cultural impacts from having a more gender balanced workforce as well. So I think the industry can benefit from women at all levels, from management to delivery drivers. And what we found as well, interestingly, that was businesses with at least 30% of women in leadership positions were actually 15% more profitable. So women bring different approaches to navigating business challenges and capitalising on new opportunities. So I think when we talk about cultural change within the industry, what we'd found is that it works best when this is led from the top. So I think the industry long-term can benefit from getting more women in leadership positions.
Perfect. Yeah. I have heard actually that statistic about that 30% of women kind of making your business a certain amount of percentage more productive as well. So it's kind of nice to hear that it wasn't just kind of me finding a random statistic on the internet and kind of being led astray. So in terms of, so that's the positives, what would happen in the other way? So what would be the impact if we didn't address gender diversity?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think obviously there's the short-term impact that we'd already discussed, where the transport sector is currently unable to keep up with the industry's forecasted growth because there's already a shortage of drivers in Australia, which women could be a potential to help fill. And then I think long-term, without more females getting involved, improvements in business outcomes, such as increased safety, productivity, and a more inclusive workplace culture will also be stalled. More women in leadership positions, as we've just discussed, actually statistically means more profit, which we'd already mentioned before. So I think that's pretty cool. And women bringing different approaches to navigating business challenges and capitalising on new opportunities. So without hiring more female talent, the odds are that your company is missing out on new ideas and skills that could boost growth. So if we say that males make up approximately 50% of the population, then there's an entire other half of the population that we risk losing touch with. And losing touch with your end-to-end customers at the end of the day can lead to ill-informed business decisions and less satisfied customers. So, yeah, I think long-term, those are probably the impacts.
Yeah, true. I was also reading an article this morning that was talking about, or I skimmed it, I should be honest, about the impacts of what happens when we don't include women or gendered data in city planning, and this idea of the impacts that has for not only how a city is built, but how women navigate the city, with this idea of them feeling kind of almost like strangers in public spaces. So it's kind of like it's a very broad topic. So of course it's one that could have probably multiple episodes about.
How interesting! I haven't come across something like that before, but it sounds incredibly insightful.
Yeah, it's really kind of interesting to see the impacts of, as you said, decision makers. And if you kind of remove the diversity out of the decision making layer, how that actually impacts what we get as an outcome across, of course, drivers in transport or the whole way that our cities are planned.
Yeah, I would actually love for you to send that across to me after this.
Yeah, I'll send that across to you after we finish recording.
That sounds awesome.
Let me make a little bit of a note there to send across the report. So in our initial kind of back and forth before we recorded, there was this discussion about misconceptions. And of course, there are misconceptions on both sides. So businesses and also candidates that are going to apply. So what are some of the common ones that you think that come up quite a lot from both the business side and also candidates who are thinking about getting into the industry but maybe kind of have a second thought?
Yeah, I think what we'd found is that women are often steered into predominantly female roles, such as, administration, accounts, hairdressing, and whether that's through conscious or unconscious biases held by hiring teams or even, early school leavers. I was actually talking to my partner about this the other day where I was going, when we were in high school, and I talked to so many people about this, it's like the options were, okay, go and do a trade or go to university. And you kind of steered into the normal gender-based roles, right? Whereas I feel like as an industry, we could probably make a big impact by just awareness, creating awareness. One of the women that we actually interviewed was a makeup artist before she got into truck driving.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so there's nothing stopping. And she still like pulls up for work every day. She's got her lashes on, her nails done. She looks incredible. And she's driving a prime mover, and the company that she's working for can't rate her high enough. So I think, we have these gender biased roles that are either consciously or unconsciously we're pushed towards for both males and females. So it's really interesting to think about the impact we could have by just creating awareness for people that are even looking to begin their careers just after high school. So I think that's definitely a big one. Outside of that, I think the transport industry also has a bit of an image problem, particularly from the viewpoint of women considering a career in the industry. I know myself, even when I first got the opportunity to work in logistics and transport recruitment, I was a little bit concerned as well with how I would go within the industry and whether I'd be taken seriously because of preconceptions that I had that weren't true, right? So I think that there's a lot that can be done to remedy this. We found in our Randstad employer brand research as well that the transport industry was only ranked number 14 on the list of sectors that Australians would like to work in. So I think that stat in itself is clear that the industry could do a lot to promote more attractive rates of pay, more attractive range of career paths on offer. And I also think there's a bit of stigma around the flexibility that the transport industry can offer as well. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of what we found in our report too with a number of the women that we interviewed was that there's many businesses that don't provide maternity leave schemes or that don't support women in their return to work, so transitioning back with part-time or casual hours. And I think that there's a lot of work to be done there as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think particularly what you talked about with the idea of when you think of a particular industry or a job role, there's this idea of a universal male or a default male. So when you think of a trade or you think of a, say, scientist, most people will then default to male unless you've actually prefaced it with female something, something, something. So it is quite interesting that you've noticed that as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I was talking to my partner about this. We do like a 15-minute vent after work each day. I was talking about, how do we change that image problem, right? And I think it actually starts from the ground. He made a comment. He's like, when you pull up to a service station and you see a giant truck there, oftentimes, the presentation of that person and things like that is, unconsciously influencing the way people view that industry, right? Mm-hmm. So I think organisations could, again, make a big impact simply by going, okay, we've got clean PPE that we're wearing, we speak well and politely, or, we just those little image things on the ground level, I think would make a big impact for the way that people perceive the industry as well, let alone, I guess, the imagery that's within the media, within advertising as well, to create more of a balanced view of what's available within the industry.
Definitely. It's almost a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, or like a catch-22, where it's like it's a male-dominated industry because there's these misconceptions, but then these misconceptions make it more of a male-dominated industry, so women don't join it, and then it just kind of becomes this vicious cycle.
Absolutely.
So in terms of practical advice or things that businesses could do in practice, what could businesses, those kind of on the lower levels, but also maybe higher up in the decision-making chain, do to address diversity gaps?
Yeah, I think in order to address the diversity gap in the transport industry, again, companies must hire and retain more females at all levels of the business. And I go back to talking about that representation within management as well, because even on the ground examples, we're currently partnered with a national transport company that's going through a huge change management process that we're supporting them with. And we're filling a lot of middle management roles at the moment. And one thing that they said to us was even women with management experience in retail would have really transferable skills for this middle management level within a transport organisation. So I think that's, such an easy pathway to bring women into management roles within companies that can then have an influence from the top down to create cultural change as well as image change, and then bring more women in from the ground up that way. The report talks about that a fair bit as well. Outside of that, I think there's progress to be made in terms of creating an attractive working environment for females. Again, I'll go back to like the flexibility side of things as well as maternity leave and return to work schemes. What we'd found through our Randstad employer branding research as well as the Women in Transport research is there wasn't a lot on offer in that regard. And again, I think having women in leadership positions would be able to create schemes or roll out schemes in a really positive way to make that a little bit more attractive to female candidates looking at the industry as well. A lot of the systems and processes in place in transport organisations don't actually support women physically to drive heavy vehicles. And there's so much that we have these days in terms of like assisted loading and unloading that would completely eliminate the physicality of some of these roles as well, which again would make it more attractive to women looking to enter the industry and more feasible for them to stay there long term as well. The report also highlighted that women found it more difficult than their male colleagues to secure training and licensing to move up into heavier vehicle classes as well. Yeah, it was quite interesting. And outside of that, I think our Randstad employer research report highlighted that the top things that was important to female candidates was a good work-life balance, flexible work hours, work from home and maternity leave schemes. So I think that there's a lot of work that the industry can do in promoting that, or if they don't have it already, creating a plan to offer that to candidates in the industry.
Of course. I like the point on transferable skills as well, because it's particularly if you're looking to break into a new industry or maybe do a bit of a pivot, which I think a lot of people have done over the last 6 to 12 months, this idea of what can you kind of take away from maybe a job like a retail job if you're, say, a Gen Z or a millennial who's just kind of looking for a grad role, and how can you take what you already have skills in but apply it to a different context.
Definitely. There was actually a report again that I read recently on LinkedIn and I shared on my LinkedIn post, and it had 7 role types, and then of those 7 role types, 13 transferable skills that you could use in another industry. And I found that really interesting as well with, I think we're moving away from going, okay, if you haven't had 12 months experience doing this, then you can't do it. And I think that was a really useful tool for employers to look at as well, with going, okay, if they've had experience in X, Y, Z and ABC, that'll actually transfer to this role as well. So I think that was quite interesting too. Yeah, I think that's also a good point to nail home, particularly if there's anyone listening who is a graduate or soon to be graduate. We talked on the idea about women in key decision-making roles and how some of this is a bit of a fundamental issue. That is that it's entrenched and a little bit systemic, because a lot of the people in those decision-making roles are not women. So how do we get more women into these positions, so not just lower level, but also kind of more higher level, to enact meaningful but also long-lasting cultural change? I think first and foremost, it's about awareness and education, right? What we found from this report as well, I don't think a lot of people within the industry would be privy to, for example. Even some of the stats around women in leadership positions were new to myself and to my colleagues. So I think people that are driving reports like this and educating organisations within the industry is the first step. Secondly, I think, again, what we touched on previously, previously about the image problem that we have and making the industry more attractive to women. So again, as a female myself, if I was in a leadership position within a transport organisation and I was wanting to attract women to drive trucks or women to be delivery drivers or extra hands or administration roles, I'd be going, okay, we don't have anything in place at the moment for maternity leave, flexible working arrangements, return to work programs that perhaps a male leader wouldn't even think of, just because they don't have to, right?
Totally.
So, yeah. And again, like I said, the transport industry is ranked only 14th on a list of sectors that would be attractive for Australians to work in from our employer brand research. So again, I think there's a lot of work that could be done in terms of promoting attractive remuneration schemes, attractive working arrangements, healthcare benefits that could potentially be ways to improve that score. And also giving females the support and the space to lead this cultural change. I think that's one of the massive benefits that could happen, and work with the entire industry. Think bigger than just one organisation or one company. We partnered with Women in Trucking Australia and Transport Women Australia, which are two organisations that are all about networking, right? They're all about bringing women together within the industry, and they're making huge impacts just by talking about it. So I think that's another huge step that we could look at too.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for chatting with me today about gender diversity and all the kind of minutiae associated with it, but also the fact that there's a little bit of data behind this as well, because I find that some of the conversations that are being had in a broader sense don't realise that there is a lot of quantitative data to kind of back this issue up.
100%. And I think that's, where the Women in Transport report was born as well, with going, okay, we're talking about it, we're hearing noise about it within the industry, but we don't actually have any data to support what the changes that we'd like to drive. One interesting thing that we looked at in the report as well was using the mining industry as a case study, because they've done really, really well with increasing diversity within their workforce, and that's across a number of different streams as well. And what we found from, again, data was that they had increased profitability, decreased accidents and incidents, happier customers, which was really interesting, more satisfied customers. And so overall, I think, having a gender balanced workforce with the data that we've been able to pull together, now we can start talking about it on a bigger level.
Amazing. Lauren, thank you so much for chatting with me today about all of this.
Thank you for having me, Emily. It's something that we've become really passionate about, so it's always awesome to talk to someone that thinks the same.
If you'd like to know more about Lauren or Randstad's Women in Transport report, I've left all of the links that you will ever need in the description of this episode. You can also check out Randstad's website, which is www.randstad.com.au. Alternatively, if you're interested about Byte Size or Compass IoT, the company that runs the podcast, you can check out our website, which is www.compassiot.com.au. Until next time.